Hello, everyone. Um, this is part 2 of my series of my experiences with the ICOC. This episode, I'm going to talk about my first year of residency, which was 2021 into 2022, um, June 2021 till probably July of 2022. And so start out. After graduating from medical school from Howard, me and my ex-wife moved with our newborn child, who was born in May, down to Fayetteville, North Carolina, in a house that we bought with my ex-wife's mother's gift. And she also moved down with us. And I was not prepared for it. As soon as she moved down with us, she was trying to run the house. And it felt like it was her and Ellie, my ex-wife, just going at it back and forth. And there's always problems that ex-mother-in-law had with me. And it led to me having very little confidence to start residency in June. As soon as I started residency in June, my family medicine residency, it was clear I was anxious. I was had no confidence. I was skittish. I was showing a lot of signs of chronic PTSD. And so that first few months, from June until really October, I was struggling at home, not me fighting the mother-in-law, really my ex-wife and my mother-in-law getting arguments about me. And then me and my ex-wife got more and more distant, and I was feeling just so down and numb that I was tired of it. And so in October, I told her that, hey, I wanted to separate. I want to live separate from you. And so I moved out and moved in with another resident. And when I moved in with that other resident, all of a sudden, I was an inpatient, a hospitalist service. There was like a switch got turned. Like I went from the least confident person in my residency program to quickly becoming very confident and building a lot of trust with the really solid providers that rotated with us. Rotations are generally 4 weeks, and so I separated on like day 2 of the rotation, and so I had a lot of 4 weeks really to see the change, and it was a totally different me. And I was feeling great, feeling like I was really making a difference, feeling like I was gaining respect, trust. And so on week 3 of that rotation, Michael Shapiro, who worked with Ellie as her advisor at Shrayheck Family Medicine in Fayetteville, he came at the end of the week during our didactic session and gave a talk on ADHD. And I have ADHD. And I've been getting treated for it for years. And it was a very good teaching session. But then afterwards, I went up to talk to him, and he was telling me, oh, your dad was a legend in the ICOC. Your dad was this, that. And I was like, well, great. But it was a really good lecture today. I really appreciate it. And kind of moved on. And then the next week, there was of several circumstances that we had a change in attending, and the previous attending, we had a patient who had special needs, and one attending that we'd had at the beginning had said that she had Alzheimer's. The family was adamant that no, she doesn't have Alzheimer's. She just functions at the level of an 11, 12-year-old and has for her entire life. She'd lived with her parents until the parents had passed away, and now was living in a nursing home. And the previous provider wanted to make her comfort care, and the family wanted to continue doing full care. And I agreed with the family. And I agreed with the family because I would have daily conversations with her, and it reminded me a lot of people on the spectrum. And like, she would remember things I would tell her. I told her about my son, and she'd remember it the next day. I'd tell her about just things happening in my life, and I'd tell her I cared about her, and she would reiterate that to me. Like, it wasn't Alzheimer's picture. It was a much more of a special needs picture. But what ended up happening was we switched from a really solid provider who agreed with me. He's actually the one who wrote my letter of rec to the board, to another provider who was trying to go with the Alzheimer's diagnosis and make her comfort care. And when that happened, and he was also doing other things with my patients that made me feel like I was the reason that we were providing substandard care, and it was retaliation towards me. So I became worried, really concerned about the patient with special needs, and decided to remove myself from the situation. And so I left the floor. I was traumatized. Like, I was so scared. And I called the one person who I probably shouldn't have called, but I was isolated. So I called my ex-wife, and she came and picked me up and suggested I call Michael Shapiro. And I did, and he wanted to see me in his office. And so I went back, moved back in with my ex-wife. And when I moved back in, I was traumatized. I was paranoid. I was freaking out. Like, I couldn't sleep. And I was like scared that people were following me. And it was a traumatized state. And I was very startled. Like, you could startle me easily. I was having auditory things going on. And I felt very confident that by going to Michael Shapiro, he would be able to correctly identify me. I was having faith in the ICOC, knowing he was a part of the Triangle ICOC. And I went and saw him. I took a leave of absence from work. I went and saw him over several weeks. And he went from calling it stress, which that was okay with me because it was stress, to he wanted me to see him after several weeks of seeing him and him coming to his diagnosis. He wanted me to bring my family with me. And now I realize it's because he knew he was going to use them to help convince me of my diagnosis. And so I talked to him, and he said his diagnosis was delusional disorder. And I was like, that don't make sense. That's not what I have. And he's recommended starting an antipsychotic. And he's a therapist recommending a drug, which is unethical as can be. But I asked him, I was like, so if you just take me off my ADHD meds and throw an antipsychotic at me, if the concerns that I'm having about care are valid, won't that just make it easier for them to mess with me? And he said, no, it won't. But I also asked him about PTSD, and he's acted like I didn't have any of the signs or symptoms, which I know now I definitely did. And I didn't accept the diagnosis at first, though. But after several days of going back to my parents' house and realizing it was my only way back into medicine, I accepted it, and I wanted to start treatment for it. And so early January of 2022, I started getting treated with antipsychotic, and I was depressed from the start. And I just kept getting more depressed, and letting Shapiro know the whole time, like, I've got text messages documenting it, that I'm depressed. And he just kept trying to tell me, just give it time. And finally, in February, late February, he started me on Lexapro. And that was around the same time I started having some suicidal ideation, and it got really bad and started coming like all the time, thinking just I wanted to be dead. And I'm grateful. Like, I felt like God left me during that time period. Like, I wasn't believing in God, but God didn't leave me. He still loved me. He protected me. And the way he protected me was I got help. Eventually, when it got so bad that I had to tell my program director, he made sure I got sent to a psychiatric hospital where I met the psychiatrist that saved my life. His name was Dr. Hal Elliott. And after he saw me and heard my story, he was very much of the opinion that it wasn't delusional disorder. Yes, I have ADHD, but I also maybe had some adjustment disorder, which to me, I could live with that. I had a lot of adjustment. I had just moved to a new city with my mother-in-law and my new wife, with my new baby, and there were 5 dogs in the house, and I was in a very strenuous portion of residency whenever everything happened. Like, that's very adjustment disorder. So he got me on the right meds, and I felt like God returned to me during that stay, talking to people about their struggles, hearing them out. I felt like the Holy Spirit returned, and it's been with me since. But moving forward, I got out. I stayed in March for about 9 days in the hospital, but then I got out, and me and my ex-wife actually had about 6 months where we were pretty solid and really had a good relationship, I felt like. But there were some strange things, though, that did happen. Dr. Elliott, who I credit for helping save my life, he passed away 2 days after I saw him in July. And it was weird because he passed away at home, and he seemed healthy when I saw him. I saw him just a few days prior. And so that was weird. And then my identity got stolen around that same time. And they like bought a bunch of phones, and watches, but they billed it all to my house where I lived. And I don't know how they opened an account in my name without having an ID. So I'm not sure where that came from, but that was when my program director warned me about getting stalked. And so that was July, and that's where I'm going to end this video, because that was the end of my first year of residency. I'll begin the next video, talk a bit about the little bit of second year of residency and the ex parte that happened to me.